is anybody out there in streaming land?
Does it work? It looks like it worked.
It looks like it worked. Hello, is anybody out there? Yes, we are live. Nope, turn the volume down.
If nobody else is, Charles Moffat is.
Charles Moffat's out there.
He's out there.
Hello, Charles Moffat.
So that's interesting. If you type out a message,
Huh?
you get instant feedback. But in the stream, you don't get instant feedback.
Janie DeHetta's out there. Hello, Janie DeHetta.
What else do you need to...
GospelChariot.church on the... We are live on GospelChariot.church, it said. Yes, there we are. So we are working. Beverly Russell says hello. Hello, Beverly Russell. So I don't know if we can keep up with all of this, but we'll try.
Yeah, you got a lot of chats going here at once.
I know, I have. That's why I have a hard time keeping up. I have a hard time keeping up with 3 different things and reading messages from 3 different places. I was kind of hoping everybody would slowly push to the website and not have them all in one spot, but
They haven't.
They keep going to Facebook.
They're going to go to Facebook. It's easier.
Yeah, but I don't. Facebook makes it more difficult for me. I could put 1 Facebook feed on here, but I can't put 2.
Don't put it on Facebook. Make them go to the website.
Yeah, I bet they wouldn't do it. All right, so we have 2.5 minutes before we're supposed to start. We just went live early so we could make sure that everything worked. Good evening.
Repeat of last week.
Yes, there's an Alex Crutcher.
Alex Crutcher. I know that guy.
Alex, maybe we should have you on as a guest.
You should. You should bring Alex in as a guest.
Yeah, we should have Alex as a guest. Jeff Goldtrap. So yeah, we're getting a few people on.
What does that say?
I have no idea.
Jeff, what does that mean? And here.
And here. So did you just I guess you just mistyped the whole thing.
Goldtrap. Something? No, that's got to stand for something.
Goldtrap. What does that stand for?
That means something, and I'm not young enough to know what it is.
Here on...
Don't try to guess. It never works. You can never guess.
I have no idea what it means. Jimmy Johnson is watching. Well, hello, Jimmy Johnson. That's cool. Reggie Clone is watching. Hey, look, Alex is watching on 2 different places.
Yeah, that's why we're echoing, Alex. You're watching on 2 different streams.
You're watching
it twice.
Yeah, you're watching it twice.
Don't watch it twice and it won't echo.
Is anybody else here at Echo? Is it only because Alex is watching it on the website and on Facebook at the same time? Nobody else is responding. Okay, we have 40 seconds. Can't start until it's time. Start on time, end on time.
What is on time for ending? No?
Whenever we get through.
Oh, he says he only shared it on Facebook. He's on the website.
Oh.
No, nobody said anything on here.
Okay, so we must not be echoey. Probably because we're in the office.
He says we're echoey. Well, we might be.
Yeah, it could be because we're just kind of stuck in the office and it echoes off the walls. Although I did set the microphone so it wouldn't catch the echo. See like our cool looking little microphone? Look at that.
Looks like something out of Star Wars.
Yeah, that's impressive, isn't it?
You gotta readjust it, but it's on the camera. You don't want it showing up.
It's not on camera.
It was for a second.
Oh, that's just because I'm tightening it up. All right, so good evening. It is now officially 7 o'clock, so we can start.
Here's an echo.
Oh, well, sorry. I think it's the office. I think we'll have to, and I don't want to put egg crates all over the office walls, but I think it's the office. I'm not sure. All of these are turned down. Oh, it is not. Hang on, you're right. All right, see if that takes care of the echo.
There you go. You had two different.
I had two microphones going at the same time.
See, we were trying to blame Alex. It was
So-
your fault.
Alex, we apologize
We're sorry.
profusely. That's a big word, isn't it?
Profusely.
Profusely. Okay, so tonight, it's better. So if your mom says it's better, it's better. So tonight we are going to do Judges again. We're going to talk about Deborah. Next Wednesday night, we are going to have a game night. So get ready for that. The way that it will work is not everybody will play the game at the same time. We will have a live stream going, and then I will invite some people to play a game through Zoom. So we will combine the live stream, the Zoom, and PowerPoint to play the games on, and so we'll have a game. We've already tested it. It kind of works, but I'm sure we'll have some hiccups. But
What is the game?
we have to make those.
Is it? Oh, okay.
We have to make the games. They're like, thank you for accepting our apology, Alex. They're like Wheel of Fortune and Tic-Tac-Toe and Battleship.
That's what I was asking. I know if it was
Yeah.
like Family Feud or.
Yeah, Family Feud is one of them. So we'll have several different games. We'll have people call in and play. So next week we're just going to have a lot of fun playing. It's really kind of geared toward some of the kids at church because they haven't been involved as much. So I'll have some of the kids who will call in to play the game. You'll be able to get on the chat, cheer them on, and have a good time. And we'll make it work. It'll be a lot of fun. It's kind of weird that all in different places, isn't it? All right, so Deborah. See if we can make this work properly. So we are in the Judges. We're going to talk about Deborah. And Deborah is a really interesting character, I think, in the book of Judges. And hopefully we'll bring some things out about that. If you have questions as we go through, we're trying to monitor every chat box. So if we're looking down, it's because we're trying to see if you're sending us a message. But you can speak up anytime you want.
Well, Deborah, or I always had somebody correct me and always told me it was Deborah. So I guess if you prescribed to either one of those, that's, I don't know.
Well, actually,
I prefer Deborah.
Actually, I didn't look at the Hebrew text. Most Hebrew words are accented on the last syllable, so it would be Deborah.
Deborah.
Yes. So I didn't look. Now, not all of them are, and I didn't. We could.
I'm just
look,
saying someone else told me that. I don't know if it's true. I don't know how right it is.
Well, Deborah would be right. So
all right.
Okay, we'll go with that. All right. So the way Judges, and this works all the way through the book of Judges. We talked about this last week, and it is this kind of phrase right here. The Israelites once more did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and that is going to occur over and over and over in the book of Judges. It's kind of weird that it did that to me, isn't it? Whoops, sorry about that. It does that over and over through the book of Judges. There are, I think if I counted correctly, there are 7 times that they do evil in the eyes of the Lord. And then there is a judge that comes into the picture. They are rescued. They go out. They sin again. God sends a judge. They're rescued. And that just kind of happens over and over. Now, last week we looked, and after Ehud, there was 80 years of peace. And by the time we get to Deborah in chapter 4, Jabin had oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. So 80 and 20, you've got a 100-year span between Ehud and between Deborah. And a lot of times when we read things like 100-year span, we think, well, that's kind of cool. But we don't stop to put that into context. So we're going to try to put that into context just a little bit. So 100 years ago, if I counted correctly, it would be 1920, right?
You're better at math than me.
Okay, 1920. So I wish we had I don't know the chat box. I don't know how to ask these questions. I should have thought through this. So, do you know in 1920, according to my research, and if this is wrong, somebody chime in and let us know. It was before there were motion pictures with sound. There were no motion pictures with sound in 1920. 100 years ago. 100 years ago, no sound in motion pictures.
It sounds right, but it's also really hard to think about. Because, like, if you look at the grand scheme of, like, history and how far we've come in just the last, like, 50 years, 100 years, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. There were only 35% of homes had electricity.
In
1920. Only 5% of farms had electricity in 1920. The first radio station started regular broadcast in 1920. So that was just the beginning of radio.
So we've only had radio for 100 years.
I love it.
Charles would know.
Charles Hearn would know. Ask him. Yeah, he was alive in 1920. Like he is Moses. He is just Moses in the Moses.
Say he was alive during Judges.
Yeah, he just gave us a first-hand account of Deborah.
He was.
I thought this was really cool. 1920, there were no refrigerators. Refrigerators, according to my research, were invented in 1927.
I'm just trying to think. If I didn't have a refrigerator, I don't know what I would do when I was bored. I don't know where I would go. That's where I always go when I don't have anything to do. If I don't have a fridge, where do you go?
I don't know. Milk was 35 cents a gallon, and gas was 30 cents.
Because you didn't have a fridge to put it in.
Yeah, you didn't have a fridge to put it in. I started to make a copy of this and put this on there, and I don't think it goes back to 1920. Let me look and see. 1922.
What are you looking at?
This is the records from the Rehoboth Church of Christ. So in 1920, is that the total contribution? I don't know if that's the total contribution on it. It was $39. In 1922, at Rehoboth Church of Christ, they bought. I was going to see, I can't hardly read some of that. I don't know if I was going to. Contribution was $4.20 a month. So, grape juice was $2. I don't know how long that lasted, but I think that's just kind of neat.
How much grape
juice? Or how much grape juice, I don't know. But anyway, things were a lot cheaper. I thought that was interesting. I should have pulled some of that out. So there's 100 years between Ehud and the peace after Ehud to the time of Deborah when Judges chapter 4 occurs. A Model T was $260.
Look, the first movie with sound, the first talkie, as it was called, was
The Jazz Singer in 1927. The same year that refrigerators were invented. So
interesting.
And refrigerators were really expensive then too, by comparison. So 100 years. So sometimes we read through the Judges and we'll go from chapter 3 to chapter 4 and say, okay, that was the next day. But it wasn't the next day. It was a pretty good span of time. So when it says that they again did evil in the eyes of the Lord, it's not like they did it the next week.
It's not even the same people.
Right. It's not even. It's like a generation or two generations
two
behind.
generations down the road.
So it would be like my generation. So like there was a huge correction. I guess my great-grandfather or grandfather. I don't know.
It gives them. It would be.
If my mom and dad are
if your grandfather, I guess.
Yeah, if Granny and Grandpa are watching, put the dates in the chat box that my grandparents, my grandfathers were born. But I think like Papa was born like in 1906.
But it's long enough for people to forget because it's not the same people.
Yeah, it would almost be, by comparison, even though we don't think about it, if we think about our own religious movement, it would kind of be like Alexander Campbell would have been Ehud, and now we again do evil in the eyes of the Lord, and we're down to this generation. So, I mean, there's a lot of span, there's a lot of years there, and a lot of things that'll happen in the life of a nation or in the life of God's people. So, I'm just trying to put that in perspective. All right, so I wanted to kind of do a map to kind of show you what we were talking about.
I don't think the map is on.
It's not. I'm working on it. You got to give me a little time.
I wanted to make sure you knew.
Yeah,
you got to give me helpful.
Got to give me a little time. So, this is the area, like from here down to here that we'll be talking about. We'll be looking at this map pretty closely. Jerusalem is way down south of this map, so it's way down here. We're not anywhere close to it. And so what we have is this is where the battle is going to occur. Jabin is up here in Hazor. Sisera is down here in this area in Haphesheth Hagoyim. And Deborah, we'll get to her in a minute. She's kind of more in this area, and Barak is up in this area. So just kind of wanted to see the area, the land that we were dealing with. So Jabin says, after Ehud died, the Israelites once again did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, a king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor, and the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim, and because he had 900 iron chariots and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried to the Lord for help. So back to our map really quickly. So my little laser pointer here. Oh, I turned it off.
Willie Hill says, hey, by the way.
Hey, hi, Willie Hill. So Jabin is up here in Hazor, all right? Sisera is down here in Hagosheth Hagoyim, and so sometimes we think like they're side by side, but they're not. They're kind of across Canaan from one another. And so in this area where you had the plains down here is where he had the 900 chariots. So he would have been a pretty formidable force. I try to think about how we could put 900 iron chariots into perspective. So maybe you think about what is one of the most formidable weapons in our day. Maybe you think like an Abrams tank or something. I don't know. But I mean, to have an iron chariot, earlier in Joshua, in the first part of Judges, one of the reasons they didn't take that area where Sisera was because it said they had iron chariots and they weren't.
Chariots are a big deal. I've always heard the tank, but I don't know if that's exactly right. I just know, a chariot is kind of 900 chariots is a lot of chariots to have.
Yes.
That's a big number.
And not just chariots, iron chariots.
That's true.
So pretty strong stuff. So in this, it says that, get us out of the way of the text, Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel. And the word leading, I'm reading, I think this is the New International Version. It may be the English Standard. It's judging Israel at that time. And she held court under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided. So we're going to stop right there and then come back to that. All right. So Deborah is a prophetess, and we don't read about a lot of prophetesses in the Old Testament. There were some, and Deborah obviously is one. It's interesting that Deborah is the first person mentioned as a prophet since Moses.
Does it talk about how old Deborah was? Because I imagine Deborah as being old and wise. But you got to think, she had to have been wise enough that you have a sort of Solomon situation where people are coming to her with their problems to find her under the palm tree.
Right.
And, hey, we have this dispute, can you solve this?
Yeah. So maybe it never mentions her age. So whatever you want to imagine,
she's got to be really smart because they're trusting her with like those sort of we're in disagreement about this thing, and it could be like their property, it could be possessions, it could be all kind of different stuff. But you have to go to somebody you trust to do that stuff with. You can't.
Yeah.
She's got to be a very well respected person in the community for her to be in a position like that. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, and we're going to look at some of the verses that have to do with the way that works. But she was highly respected. She was wise. That the people must have trusted her. I mean, some of the other prophetesses that are mentioned in the Old Testament, Miriam, the sister of Moses, was called a prophetess. Huldah, who is a very interesting study. We ought to do Huldah sometime. She's a very interesting study. When we came to her to ask for her judgment as a prophet, the wife of Isaiah calls his wife a prophetess, but that's all we know is that he calls her a prophetess, so she was a prophetess.
Huldah sounds like she would be a Viking or something.
Well, and there's Noadiah in Nehemiah who's called a prophetess, but she was actually opposing Nehemiah, so I guess technically she was a bad prophetess, but she was still considered to be a prophetess. But usually when we think of prophet kind of people, we think like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, all those guys.
You might as well go all the way through them now. You got over halfway there.
Yeah, and they're kind of well known because they wrote books of prophecy or they made declarations of the future. They're well known because they give long sermons, and Deborah doesn't do any of that. She doesn't write a book. She does, in a way, predict some events because she predicts Barak's victory over Sisera.
Have we gotten to the part where Barak goes down there yet?
No, we're going to get to that. You're jumping ahead of the text. So we don't rehearse this, by the way, if you can tell. And there was another interesting thing that I kind of found out as I was reading through this and kind of doing this study of Deborah, and I don't really know what to make out of this, so don't make too much out of it because I haven't made too much out of it yet. But I studied it, I thought it was interesting, so I'm going to tell you about it. One of the things that's interesting is in Judges chapter 5, Deborah has a song, and I'd never really noticed before. But when you start thinking about the word prophecy and also the idea of singing, you end up with this really I don't know, it's kind of a strange connection because I don't know what to make out of it yet. We'll have a class on this when I've studied it, so I'm going to tell you about it. That way you can study it and you can come up with it and you can educate me. This was about Saul. And after that, you will go to Gibeah of God, where there is a Philistine outpost. And as you approach the town, you will meet a procession of prophets coming down from the high place with lyres, tambourines, flutes, and harps being played before them, and they will be prophesying. And I think that's really interesting because what are they doing when they're prophesying?
Well, they could be singing their prophecy.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like they're singing their prophecy. They got all these tambourines and flutes and things going on. And then when you get to 1 Chronicles and David is setting up the temple, David and the chiefs of the service also set apart for the service of the sons of Asaph and of Heman and of Jeduthun, and man, it's wild names, who prophesied with lyres and harps and cymbals. So they're also prophesying with musical instruments.
Well, since we were talking about history just a minute ago, they don't have printing presses.
Right.
Most of their information and stuff would have been passed down through oral tradition.
Right.
And song is a really good memory tool. So if you're prophesying and you want people to remember what you're saying, song's not a bad choice.
It's a great choice because our minds remember songs. I'm amazed sometimes when we go sing at the nursing home and people who have memory issues that can't remember a lot of things, when we start singing songs,
they know
they
words.
remember all of the words to the songs. That's one thing that's just kind of trapped in our brains. Did I read this one? Oh, and this was later in 1 Chronicles 25 in the same scenario. And it says on there that they prophesied with a lyre and in thanksgiving and praise to the Lord. And I just think it's interesting that in that connection of Deborah, Miriam, the prophetess, who's called the prophetess in Exodus 15, the sister of Aaron, took a tambourine in her hand, and with all the women went out after her with tambourines and dancing. So even when she's called a prophetess, in that context, she's singing.
There's some song involved in that.
There's some song involved in it.
That actually makes me think of Schoolhouse Rock because I was never ever quizzed or tested or asked to know the preamble in school. And I was disappointed that no one ever made me do that because I know it, and I don't know it because I memorized it. I know it because it played on Schoolhouse Rock CDs, and I know the song.
Right, we watched
so
a lot of.
Remember.
Yeah, the boys watched a lot of Schoolhouse Rock CDs while we were driving down the road. So Deborah is a prophetess, and that puts her in a pretty unique category. But interestingly, I mean, Deborah is a really incredible woman. Not only is she a prophetess, she is a judge. And I want to go to a verse and then come back really quick. This is from Deuteronomy, and this is kind of where the idea of the judges came to. If cases come before your courts that are too difficult for you to judge, this is to the judges that Moses has appointed, whether bloodshed, lawsuits, or assaults, take them to the place the Lord your God will choose. Go to the priests who are Levites and to the judge who is in office at that time. Inquire of them, and they will give you a verdict. And Deborah is listed as one of the judges. I mean, just like if you've been in Teresa's Lee's class, you're supposed to have all the judges memorized. Do you still have all those memorized from Miss Teresa's class? Oh no, me either. So
I did.
I'm sure there are
sure
people.
She made me memorize them.
She'll probably now call you and make you memorize them.
She's probably mad at me for saying no.
Yeah. So so in some ways we translate this not just as judge, but as to rule. And it's interesting to me when she does have this interaction with Barak that we're going to look at in a few minutes. Barak doesn't say, well, who are you to tell me what to do, or who are you to ask me that question? He recognizes that Deborah is a prophetess, a judge, highly respected, and as we're going to find out, is really determined to have her companionship in going and doing this thing that God has told him to do.
Well, he obviously sees her as an authority figure, and
yes,
he is obvious. I mean, you look at what happens in a minute. He's very comforted by her presence. It's like when you think about any like Saul and Solomon almost, where Saul kind of relied on Solomon for a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yes. So anyway, here we go. So this is our first point. Deborah was God's instrument to solve a crisis. I mean, the crisis was the Israelites had turned away from God. He needed someone, and so he raised Deborah up. And it's interesting that it never says, like some of the other judges, that he raised Deborah up, but I think the context implies that. I don't think he has to say that every time. So Deborah was God's instrument to solve a crisis. And I wanted you to see on the map kind of where Deborah is. So, hi Jenna Bunner. So this is let me just zoom in on that. I think I can zoom in on that. All right, so this is the area right here that Barak is from. Oh, I'm losing my laser pointer. What happened to it? Here we go. So this is the area right here that Barak is from, up here close to the Sea of Galilee. And remember that, who's the bad guy? Jabin. Jabin's from up in this area, so they're not too far apart. If you scroll back out and look down in this area down here is where Deborah, the palm of Deborah is between Ramah, which is here, and Bethel, which is here. So somewhere in this area is where the palm of Deborah is, where they would come to Deborah for judgment. Hey, quick question. Does anybody remember which other key figure in the Old Testament came from Ramah toward the end of the book? Not yet, but he's going to come from there. Samuel.
Just you gave it away.
I gave it away.
You can't. Now they can't.
Now
answer
they can't.
There's no prize.
Sorry, there's no prize. Now I answered it. All right, I was really just asking you. But so the palm tree of Deborah was somewhere in this area, right in here.
Which there's not a thing on there, but I feel like he walked a really long way to get there.
Yeah, I don't know how. Well, I'm sorry. I was trying to get back to the slide Houston was talking about.
And he actually didn't. He didn't just go there. She called for him.
Yeah, she calls for him.
Get over here and I got something to tell you.
Yeah, she calls for him, and he comes from here down to here. And I'm not really sure. I should have looked to see how far that was, but I'm not really sure how far that is.
Which adds on to the level of respect where she can just summon him like that from that far away, and he just goes.
Right. So when if you got your Bible, I want to put the verse up here. So when Houston says she summons Barak and he comes down, however far that was, and I think Houston had a great point. She must have really respected him to come when she called. So she calls for him and he shows up. So she is highly respected.
You don't do that for a lot of people.
No. You don't do that for a lot of people.
I don't do that, and I can drive instead of walking.
And you still don't do that?
Yeah.
So she said, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead the way to Mount Tabor. I will lure Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands. So this is a really interesting verse. I wish I knew. Okay, so I took this out of the NIV. If you look at some other translations, this is going to be phrased as the question. It's going to say, did not the Lord your God command you to do this?
This is one thing that I learned while I was at Harding that I did not know, is because a lot of our translations don't do a good job of expressing this. There is a lot of sarcasm in the Bible, in statements like this, where it's a question, but it's not really a question.
Right.
It's a question where they already know the answer.
Right. It's kind of, there's a couple of places that the Hebrew Bible does this. It's a question, but it's a kind of a question where you ask the question, but you already know the answer, and you're only asking the question to make a point. Like if I were to say, didn't I tell you to take out the garbage?
Yeah, like
I mean that is a question, but it's not a question.
Is no, and he knows the answer is no, and I know that I was supposed to do it.
Yeah,
but it's not really a question; it's more of a command.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting kind of it's really interesting the way that she phrases it. She asks a question, and it's probably best for us to translate it this way because it's even in asking a question, it's more like, hey, you're not doing what God told you to do. And I think even that is interesting because if God told Barak to do it, but Deborah knows that God told Barak, that gets into the prophetess thing again. So Deborah knows that he's been given a command,
well,
and
she may have been the one
that he's not following it, and she may have earlier, even though it's not mentioned in the text. You're right. She may have given him the command.
He probably knew he was in trouble the entire way down there too.
Well, he might have. He might have.
He knew why he was going down there.
It's interesting sometimes to think about what the text doesn't tell you. Because there is a lot
by not telling you.
Yeah, what it tells you by not telling you, and so I think that's really interesting. And some people, that's not really fair to say. Some people. One of the questions that comes up about Deborah is if Deborah was a judge, then why did she have a commander of the army? Because you get to some other people like Gideon. I mean, he went into battle for himself, right? And Samson. But when you look at this particular story, you have Hazor, and he has a commander of the army in Sisera. And even Moses had a commander of the army in Joshua. And even David had commanders of armies, right? So
yeah, David had a bunch of them.
Anyway, he is supposed to go to Mount Tabor, which we're going to look at on the map in just in a second. And God is going to, and this is an interesting thing in here. Don't miss this. God is going to lure. Keep messing my laser point.
Good. I was going to ask about that.
He is going to lure Sisera out. So God is going to lure Sisera into where he needs to be.
Which also, you're going to get into this in a minute. I don't want to ruin it.
Well, I may
too
not.
Much.
So go ahead.
Well, the whole big deal with this guy is that he has chariots.
Yes.
And if you have chariots, the river is not really the place where you want to be fighting.
Right. You want to be on the plains.
What he's doing is God is going to lure. What's this guy's name? Sisera. To a battlefield where he shouldn't really be going to. I mean, you would think the man is a commander of an army, and he's used to having chariot. The dude knows not to go fight where he's about to go fight. But
well, there are some claims there, which is pretty interesting. But at the same time, yeah, it's. I think there's something. I think there's a hint of something in the text about what happens, and I don't want to let that out just yet. But I think there's a hint at what God does when He gets him out there. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? So, Barak, who is the commander of the army, says, "Well, if you go with me, I'll go. But if you're not going to go, I'm not going to go."
right.
So,
and that adds to the whole, like, he feels like he needs her to be there.
Yeah.
In the same way that there were a lot of instances where Saul felt like he needed Solomon to be there, and then the one where he didn't feel like Solomon needed to be there, and that created a whole bunch of problems. But
yeah, you lost me in that.
Where he did the sacrifice and all that stuff before Solomon.
Oh, Samuel, not Solomon. Samuel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm with you. I was trying to put those two together.
They're both S names. It's the same thing. Yeah, but I mean, it's like, I'll go, but only if you go with me. He's there.
So Deborah, again, is this highly incredible woman where the commander of the army says, well, I'll go, but only if you go. And I don't know if he's not confident in God's message, so he says, it's kind of like, well, you gave me this message, so if you think it's really true, you're going to have to go with me. I mean, I don't know if it's something like that. Or he just has a lack of faith in God. I don't know if it's that Deborah was just such a strong leader that he didn't want to go without her. It doesn't say, but then you ask, so I asked the question, why did Barak need Deborah to go? But then you asked a really interesting question too. Why did Deborah need Barak anyway? Why didn't she just...
I've read Deborah before, and my question is, why does Deborah need Barak?
Yeah, but for whatever reason, and there's a lesson in there. I didn't put this in here, but for whatever reason, God needed both of them to be a part of this. And sometimes we lose. I mean, I didn't put this in as a lesson, but sometimes we lose sight of that. We're not supposed to do things by ourselves, but we're supposed to have a group of people to help us, or we need somebody by our side to make sure something happens. But then Deborah tells him, okay, I'll go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman.
Which I think this is interesting because, not this, the last thing we're talking, I'm backtracking again, okay, because another thing popped into my head. But I've sat through Deborah Bible classes before, and for some reason, it's always highlighted that what Barak did was a bad thing. That was like the coward's way out is, I need you to come with me. But was that inherently a bad decision? I think it may have been a good one, actually. I don't want to look down on Barak for that, because he sees someone that's, valuable to him, that he respects, and says, I'd feel a lot better if you came with me.
Yeah.
And it's always been like, well, look how little faith Barak had, but there's nothing wrong with asking for help.
Yeah,
and I don't see anything inherently wrong with what he did there.
No, and I don't think there is anything inherently wrong. You also have to be careful of this, because a lot of times we'll read a passage like this and we'll say, well, the reason that Deborah had to step up is because no man would step up. It never says that in the text. Don't read that in the text. That's not what it says. Deborah has an important role and a function, and God uses her for what He's prepared her for.
And Barak did step up and go. He just wanted her there with him.
Yeah, Barak, he never says, he never refuses to go. He just wants to make sure that Deborah goes with him. You're going to go fight 900 chariots. That's a pretty big deal. The other thing that I think is interesting is when you read that, okay, so the Lord would sell Sisera into the hand of a woman, and you instantly think, okay, Deborah's going to get all the glory, but that's not really what happens. So there's a little bit of irony in that as well.
More spoilers.
We're not there another yet. Spoiler. So, spoiler alert. Okay, where did we get to? What time is it?
It's 7:35. We're being slow, but that's okay.
Okay. So, I thought this was interesting. So, Barak has 10,000 men, right? And Gideon, in a story later, he starts with 32,000.
Right.
And then he says everybody who's afraid can leave. So, he gets down to 10,000. And God says, well, that's too many. You need to call those out. So, then he gets it down to 300, because God says, I want to make sure that you know that I am delivering you. So Gideon had 10,000 men. God said that was too many. God caused Barak to have 10,000 men. He thinks that's just enough.
I think it depends on what God's plan is. God had a plan for both of those situations. Right. Gideon didn't have to fight any chariots. In fact, Gideon didn't really do any fighting at all.
Broke some jars.
Barak might have needed 10,000. Like, God may say 10,000 is the right number for this because he knows what his plan is, and he knows what they're going to need for it.
And I think there's an interesting lesson in there, because sometimes we look at what God does and we say, okay, there's only one way to do it. God does things according to the situation.
I mean, he could have just smote the 900 chariots with fire, but he didn't do that.
Didn't. He could have not used any of them.
He definitely would have got all the credit if he did it that way.
But he didn't do it that way.
He did it a different way.
Right. And I think this is never written in the text, so you can't put this in the text. This is just my interpretation, okay? I think that God needed an army that Sisera would see that was big enough that he would bring his 900 chariots. I think if you had a small army,
small enough that he would underestimate.
Yeah, but so if you took, if you only sent 300 men, he might have said, well, I can take care of those with 100 chariots, right? God needed him to have 900 chariots, I think. So
because he was all of them at once.
So I think he needed an army big enough that would cause Sisera to bring out his force. And this is just another interesting thing. I'm going to try to put this on the text on the screen where you can see it. And again, I'm trying not to read too many things in the text, but I think it's a little bit interesting. See if I can do this. All right, so I got that part done. So when you go over to Judges chapter 5, where Deborah writes her song, she says a couple of interesting things. I got to get rid of us. It says, you can see this screen right here. It says, when you marched out from the land of Edom, the earth shook and the heavens poured, the clouds poured down like water, the mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. So hang on to that verse for me for just a second. And then if you go a little further over, I haven't quite tried to do it this way. Right here, the river Kishon swept them away, the age-old river, the river Kishon, march on my soul and be strong. When you combine those two things, I wonder if one of the things that happened in that battle was that God sent rain on them.
And you got 900 chariots in a floodplain, and then it floods.
Yes. What do you think a huge rainstorm and a flood would do to an army of chariots? Now, it never says in the battle that God sent rain. But when you look at the Song of Deborah and you read the things that she put in the song, it seems to me like that's a real possibility. He lures them into the plain. I need to go back to the map so you can see this. I don't want to show you that yet. So
avert your eyes.
So the battle. This is why I'm good. I won't get it. So the battle is. So the battle is going on. Get my laser pointer back out here. So they meet here. And so in the plains, and you've got the Kidron River that runs all the way through here. So they fight. He flees, right, through the plains. Then he flees again and he gets killed way over here. All right. But it's like the river, the plains, the rain. It seems to me that maybe God just kind of sent this rainstorm. And if you had that with all of those chariots, pulled this picture off. This is from World War II. It's a German tank that's stuck in the mud close to the Russian front. So, I think with the chariots and all the things that were going on, I just think that'd be really neat. What was that thing that you said earlier about?
Oh, don't camp in a swamp?
Yeah, don't camp in a swamp. Doesn't have anything to do with this, but it's funny.
Anything to do with that. Well, it's also interesting because you that dude right there is just walking right on top of that, but then you put a big heavy tank in the mud like that and it just sinks. It can't go anywhere.
So anyway, that's that's just kind of a thought about what might have happened in the text. But anyway, so they go out to battle, and it also kind of answers a question because Sisera, they go into battle. Let me go back to here again. And so you can see the text. I don't know if y'all have the Bible with you, so I want to make sure that you can see it. So at Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all of his chariots and army by the sword, and Sisera abandoned his chariot and fled on foot. And I've always wondered why he abandoned his chariot and fled on foot.
To flee on a chariot, wouldn't it?
It would be quicker to go on the chariot. But if I'm right and it got stuck in the mud, that would help me figure that out.
When you go back to all of the luring Sisera, over to the river, it's always astounded me reading history and things like that, what stupid things commanders will do when they think they can't lose.
Right.
If you go back, there are so many battles that have been won because the person in charge thought it was impossible for them to lose. And they did something they knew way better than to do, and it messed them all up. Yeah. And this is just a case of that. You see it in history again. It's just God lures him out. He knows exactly how many people he needs. I don't know. That's just kind of what I'm thinking. That's where my brain is going. But he comes into battle thinking, got 900 chariots. I can't lose. It doesn't matter if I'm by the river or not. We can win this. And then he loses.
All right. So he leaves his chariot. He runs away. He now happened in the story, okay, and it's way back. And when it's in the story, you kind of wonder, well, how is this going to fit together, right? And it's this thing in verse 11. Now, Heber the Kenite had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree in Zananim near Kadesh. And when they told Sisera that Barak the son of Abinoam had gone up to Mount Tabor, he gathered his 900 chariots. So you really need this. You need this verse to know what's going on. So that Heber and Sisera and what's the king's name? Jabin. So they're kind of all allies. So, and when you get down here to verse 18, 17, Sisera, however, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Remember, he's up here. Because they were friendly relations between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the clan of Heber the Kenite. So he's running to somebody who he thinks is his ally. And Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." Okay. So he entered the tent, and she put a covering over him. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." So she opened a skin of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him up. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say, 'No.'"
Sounds like a pretty good plan so
far. But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted, and she drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. I mean, I don't even know how we do that thing. And the prophecy is fulfilled. And Barak came by in pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him. "Come," she said, "I will show you the man you're looking for." So he went up with her, and there lay Sisera with a tent peg through his temple, dead. I found it very interesting that both times that he writes, he's got a tent peg through his hand. That they have to put, he was dead.
And also he's dead.
And he's dead. So,
well, I mean, you could have a tent peg through your tent. What was that? Yeah. There was one dude that had a iron rod that went like through his head, and he lived, and it scrambled his brain all up, and he never acted the same. I don't know why I got off on that.
I'm
saying it's possible.
I guess it's possible.
It has happened.
Yeah. So on that day, God subdued Jabin, the Canaanite king, before the Israelites, and the hand of the Israelites grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, the Canaanite king, until they destroyed him. And then you get to the Song of Deborah, which we won't have a chance to get to tonight. But you need to read Judges 5 after this to kind of get a feeling of that. So he is delivered into the hand of a woman, but it's not into the hand of Deborah. It's into the hand of Jael. I'm trying to get my thing back up so I can change my slides. Of Jael. And so then it's interesting when you get to Judges 5, it's the song of, it's just interesting to me that Deborah's name comes first. It's the song of Deborah and Barak, not the song of Barak and Deborah. I don't know that that means anything, but I think it might be important in there somewhere. And hey, if y'all got questions about that story, we need them. But I think the whole point of Deborah was a really incredible woman in the Bible that God used for a very specific and I mean, it's just an incredible story of what a great woman she was. And I read this not long ago. I didn't write this, but someone once pointed out it was a woman who prompted Jesus to perform his first miracle. It was women who ministered to Christ during his public ministry. It was a woman who anointed the body of Jesus before he was crucified. It was the women who stayed with Jesus throughout his trial and crucifixion, and it was women who were the first witnesses of the resurrected Jesus. And sometimes, we need to make sure that we elevate and appreciate the way that God uses women in Scripture and the way that He uses women in church.
Well, you can talk about that all day. You got Rahab, you got Deborah, you got Esther, Ruth, which all of, except Deborah, to the best of my knowledge, are in the lineage of Christ,
yes.
Right?
Yes. And somebody pointed out one time that Deborah is not in the great heroes of faith in chapter 11 of Hebrews, and Barak is, but
that doesn't mean a whole lot.
Doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, he says, I can't list everybody in this list. I mean, he's to write a book. So, anyway, that's our lesson on Deborah. But we'll take comments and questions if you have any.
Did you have takeaways?
I did not have takeaways.
You didn't write it. I always think you could. I think you could take a few things away. I think one, that nothing wrong with asking for help. You got Barak who says, "Hey, I need you to come with me. Make me feel a lot better if you come with me." I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's a good thing.
I agree with that.
You can go to, if you serve God, don't do it for the credit, because Barak didn't really get any credit. He didn't really do anything. It didn't matter that he didn't kill the enemy commander. It was some girl in a tent with a tent peg.
Yeah.
So I guess, it doesn't really, if you're trying to do what you do to get credit for it, you're probably going to be disappointed, because God's going to get the credit regardless of how much you want it, because he's the one that deserves it, not you. Yeah.
Hey, you go to that commercial that you stay in your lane, right? Because
stay in your lane.
Deborah had a role, and she was the prophetess and the judge, and Barak had a role. He was the commander, and they needed each other. And it's good that he asked for help, and it's also good that Deborah recognized the skill, the use of Barak and what he was there for, why God had chosen him. And another takeaway from that is it's good when we hold each other accountable for what God told us to do.
I was just thinking, because Barak obviously needed a kick in the pants right there. He was fiddling around.
He needed somebody to come say to him, "You are not doing what you're supposed to be doing. I mean, you've got a command from God, and you're not following it." So there's several good takeaways right there.
We haven't gotten any questions.
I know.
I've been watching.
Well, I'm watching too, but no questions. Well, you must have explained it incredibly well, because we don't have any questions. All right, so if we don't have any questions, do you have anything else you want to say?
That's all I got.
That's all you got?
I got nothing left.
Again, I mean, I know that this whole thing's supposed to be like on the other side of the curve, but remember, on the other side of the curve, there's still a curve, right? It's just going down, but
it's still there.
But it's still there. So there's still people who are in higher risk categories who do not need to get out. You don't need to, if you're feeling bad, you don't need to run an errand. So if you need an errand, if you need medicine, groceries, I'm taking care of a few small things, but not anything big. There's my phone number, email, if you need to text that to us. Email, phone call, whatever you need to do for that. We are still streaming. We'll be streaming this Sunday at 10 o'clock. We'll be doing our game next Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. And between now and Sunday, we will be having some conversations about when we might want to start meeting together again, and how that would look, what we would need to do, how we need to do that in a way that keeps everybody safe. So, I mean, there will be some conversations about that going on in the next week. So we'll keep you updated about how that's going to happen and when it's going to happen. But right now, I mean, I know that Sunday at 10 we are still going to be live streaming, and next Wednesday night at 7 we are still going to be live streaming. So we hope that you'll join in. And next Wednesday we're just going to have some fun. We're going to have some game night stuff, and it's all Bible based though. Okay, all Bible based games. And
that would make sense.
Yeah. One thing that could help me for next week is if you do know how to use Zoom, send me a text or an email, because I'm gonna need to pull some people into a Zoom meeting and then broadcast the Zoom meeting so you can see what's going on. But if you know how to use Zoom, if you have experience with that, please let me know. I might want to pull you into a game. All right. There's no questions. There's no comments. There's nothing else that we know.
No criticisms, chastisements, or otherwise words of encouragement.
Yeah, Tom Holland used to say, are there any chastisement, rebukes? I forgot. Otherwise, words of encouragement.
I just stole one you had. I mean,
and that was the one I got from him. I stole it from Tom Holland, but I can't think of it right now. You always say
criticism, chastisements, otherwise words of encouragement. Questions, criticisms, chastisements, otherwise words of encouragement. Is that one I remember? I don't know.
Yes, I always remember Tom Holland would end his class, his Bible classes with that, or at least he would a bunch of times. So I thought that was always cool. So I borrowed it from him. All right, good night, folks. Y'all have a good